It's March 1943, and Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of Germany's U-boat fleet, is looking at the sinking statistics with grim satisfaction. His submarine wolf packs have just achieved their greatest monthly success of the entire war. Over 100 Allied merchant ships were sent to the bottom in a single month. The tonnage numbers are staggering. At this rate, Britain will run out of food, fuel, and war materials within a matter of months. The island nation will starve or surrender. Germany is on the verge of winning the Battle of the Atlantic and with it, potentially the entire war. But then something changes. Within weeks, the tables turn completely. U-boats that were hunting convoys with impunity are suddenly being hunted themselves. By May 1943, Donitz was compelled to withdraw his wolf packs from the North Atlantic due to the unsustainable losses they were suffering. The window of victory slams shut. But here's the question that haunts historians. What if it hadn't? What if Germany had made different decisions with its U-boat campaign? Could the wolf packs have actually won the Battle of the Atlantic and strangled Britain into submission? Let's start by understanding what the Battle of the Atlantic actually was and why it mattered so much. Britain is an island nation that imports most of its food, fuel, and raw materials. During World War II, everything Britain needed to survive and fight came by ship across the Atlantic. Food from America, oil from the Caribbean, steel and weapons from American factories. If Germany could sink enough merchant ships and cut Britain's lifeline across the Atlantic, Britain would be forced out of the war. No food means starvation. No fuel means the economy stops. No weapons means the army can't fight. It's that simple and that brutal. Germany's weapon of choice for strangling Britain was the U-boat, short for Unterseeboot, submarine. German submarines had proven devastating in World War I, nearly forcing Britain to surrender before America entered that war. Hitler and Donitz believed that U-boats could achieve the same goal in World War II, but more effectively, with better technology and tactics. The idea was simple. Station submarines in the Atlantic shipping lanes, find Allied convoys, and sink as many merchant ships as possible. If Germany could sink ships faster than the Allies could build them, eventually there wouldn't be enough ships to supply Britain. The math was cold but clear. Sink enough tonnage and Britain loses. The Wolfpack tactic that made U-boats so effective was developed by Donitz before and during the war. Instead of submarines operating alone, they'd work in coordinated groups called Wolfpacks. German intelligence would locate an Allied convoy. U-boats in the area would be directed to converge on it. Then they'd attack simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming the convoy escorts and sinking as many merchant ships as possible before the escorts could respond effectively. This tactic was devastating because convoy escorts designed to defend against 1 or 2 submarines couldn't handle 8 or 10 attacking at once. In the early years of the war, from 1939 to 1941, U-boats achieved remarkable success. They sank hundreds of Allied merchant ships. Britain was suffering severe shortages. The U-boat threat was so serious that Churchill later wrote, "It was the only thing that truly frightened him during the war." Merchant ship losses were outpacing construction. Experienced merchant mariners were being killed faster than they could be replaced. If the trend continued, Britain would be strangled. But several factors prevented Germany from achieving complete victory during this period. First, Germany didn't have enough U-boats. At the start of the war, Germany had fewer than 60 submarines, and many of these were smaller coastal boats not suitable for Atlantic operations. Donitz believed he needed 300 operational U-boats to defeat Britain. He never got that number. Production was slow, losses mounted, and Hitler diverted resources to other projects. The U-boat force was effective but not large enough to sever Britain's supply lines completely. This issue persisted throughout the war. Second, Allied countermeasures improved constantly. The convoy system, where merchant ships traveled in groups protected by warships, made attacks on submarines more hazardous. Depth charges and sonar allowed escorts to hunt submerged U-boats. Aircraft patrolling from Britain could attack submarines on the surface. As the war progressed, these countermeasures became more sophisticated and more effective. But until 1943, U-boats were still winning the tonnage war. They were sinking ships faster than the Allies could replace them. Germany seemed to be on track to victory in the Atlantic. The period from late 1942 to early 1943 was the crisis point. U-boat numbers had increased significantly. Production finally ramped up, and more submarines were reaching operational status. Wolfpack tactics were refined and highly effective. Allied merchant shipping losses reached catastrophic levels. In November 1942, over 700,000 tons of Allied shipping were sunk. In March 1943, it was even worse. Britain's food reserves were measured in weeks. Fuel stocks were critically low. If this continued for another few months, Britain might be forced to negotiate peace to survive. This was Germany's best chance to win the Battle of the Atlantic. However, the situation then reversed with shocking speed. Several factors converged simultaneously in mid-1943, turning the battle decisively against the U-boats. First, Allied shipbuilding finally outpaced sinking. American shipyards utilizing mass production techniques were launching merchant ships faster than U-boats could sink them. The Liberty Ship program was building simple, standardized cargo ships at unprecedented rates. Entire ships were being built in weeks rather than months. Even heavy U-boat activity couldn't keep pace with this production. Second, the Allies closed the mid-Atlantic air gap. Early in the war, a section of the Atlantic was beyond the range of land-based aircraft. U-boats operated in this air gap with relative freedom because aircraft were the most effective submarine hunters. But by 1943, the Allies had very long-range aircraft and escort carriers that could provide air cover across the entire Atlantic. Suddenly, there was nowhere for U-boats to surface safely. Aircraft could attack them anywhere. This was devastating for U-boat operations because submarines of this era required regular surface intervals to recharge their batteries and ventilate the boat. Third, radar technology improved dramatically. Early radar systems were unable to reliably detect submarines on the surface, especially at night or in adverse weather conditions. But by 1943, cinemetric radar could detect even a submarine periscope at reasonable ranges. U-boats that surfaced at night, thinking they were invisible, could be detected and attacked by radar-equipped aircraft and ships. The U-boats' nighttime surface attacks, which had been highly effective, became suicide missions. German submarines initially lacked effective radar detectors, so they were unaware of being tracked until the attack occurred. Fourth, ultra-code breaking was providing the Allies with detailed intelligence about U-boat positions and operations. The British had broken German naval codes and were reading many U-boat communications. This allowed convoys to be routed around known Wolfpack positions. It let Allied forces concentrate against U-boat groups. It provided tactical intelligence that made escort actions far more effective. The Germans were unaware that their codes had been broken, so they continued to use compromised communication systems. This intelligence advantage was absolutely crucial, but the Allies kept it secret even after the war to protect their code-breaking capabilities. The combination of these factors created what Dönitz referred to as Black May in 1943. In that single month, 43 U-boats were lost. That's nearly a quarter of the operational U-boat fleet destroyed in 30 days. The losses were unsustainable. Dönitz had no choice but to withdraw his submarines from the North Atlantic temporarily. When they returned later with new tactics and technology, they were unable to regain their earlier effectiveness. The Battle of the Atlantic continued until the war's end, but after May 1943, Germany was clearly losing the battle. The question is, could it have been different? Let's examine the what-ifs, as there were several points where different German decisions or circumstances might have altered the outcome. The biggest question is U-boat numbers. Dönitz consistently argued that he needed more submarines than he was given. What if Hitler had prioritized U-boat construction from the beginning? What if instead of 60 submarines at the start of the war, Germany had 200? What if the construction rate that was achieved in 1942 and 1943 had been completed in 1940 and 1941? With larger numbers earlier, could the wolf packs have strangled Britain before American industrial power fully mobilized? The math is compelling. Allied shipbuilding capacity in 1940 and 1941 was much lower than it would be later. If Germany had fielded 200 operational U-boats by mid-1941, before American Liberty ship production really got going, they could have sunk Allied merchant shipping at rates that couldn't be replaced. Britain's reserves would have been exhausted. American industrial help wouldn't matter if there weren't enough ships to carry the supplies across the Atlantic. This scenario isn't far-fetched. It just required Germany to invest in submarine production earlier and more heavily than they actually did. However, this raises the issue of resource constraints. Germany's industrial capacity was limited. Building more U-boats meant building fewer tanks, aircraft, or other weapons. Hitler's strategic focus in 1939 to 1941 was on continental Europe, not the Atlantic. He aimed to defeat France, then Britain, then the Soviet Union. In his mind, U-boats were useful but secondary to ground and air forces. Prioritizing submarines would have meant accepting slower rearmament in other areas. This might have cost Germany the ability to defeat France or invade the Soviet Union. These trade-offs aren't simple. Every resource devoted to U-boats is a resource not available elsewhere. Another critical what-if involves technology. German engineers developed several advanced submarine designs during the war. The Type XXI U-boat was revolutionary, capable of high underwater speed and equipped with advanced battery systems that allowed it to stay submerged for weeks. If these advanced submarines had been developed and deployed earlier, they could have negated many Allied countermeasures. The Type XXI could outrun surface ships while submerged, making depth charge attacks ineffective. They could operate submerged for so long that aircraft couldn't catch them on the surface. They were potentially game-changing. The Type XXI started production in 1943 but didn't become operational until 1945, too late to affect the outcome. What if Germany had begun the development of advanced submarines earlier? What if Hitler had invested in submarine technology in the late 1930s instead of focusing on surface ships? The resources wasted on battleships like Bismarck and Tirpitz could have been spent on advanced submarine research and production. This might have given Germany submarines in 1942 that the Allies couldn't effectively counter. Combined with larger numbers, advanced submarines could have been a decisive factor in the outcome. There's also the question of German naval codes. The Allies' ability to intercept and read German naval communications was crucial. What if Germany had better operational security? What if they'd realized their codes were compromised and changed their systems? Without ultra-intelligence, the Allies would have had much more difficulty finding and protecting convoys. U-boat wolf packs would have been harder to detect and avoid. This intelligence advantage gave the Allies such an edge that removing it might have significantly extended the crisis period in the Atlantic. Some historians argue that the German submarine strategy was inherently flawed. The wolf packs' focus on convoys made sense tactically, but strategically, it might have been better to spread submarines out and attack independently. Concentrated escort forces could protect convoys, but spreading U-boats across the entire Atlantic would have forced the Allies to spread escorts thin, too. This might have resulted in fewer dramatic convoy battles, but more consistent losses of merchant ships over a wider area. Whether this would have been more effective overall is debatable, but it's worth considering. Another strategic option would have been mining operations. Germany had effective naval mines, and British ports and approaches could have been heavily mined. This would have resulted in additional shipping losses and compelled the Allies to divert resources to minesweeping. Combined with U-boat attacks, a comprehensive mining campaign might have increased the pressure on Allied shipping beyond what U-boats alone could achieve. Germany did mine British waters, but not as extensively as they might have. More focus on this might have helped. The timing of America's entry into the war also mattered enormously. America entered the war in December 1941 after Pearl Harbor, but American merchant ship production didn't really hit stride until mid-1942. There was a window of several months during which America was at war, but hadn't yet fully mobilized industrially. If Germany had achieved maximum U-boat effectiveness during this window, before American production overwhelmed them, the outcome might have been different. But by the time Germany had enough U-boats to really threaten Allied shipping, American shipbuilding was already ramping up dramatically. There's also the question of whether Britain could have been starved into submission even if U-boats had sunk more shipping. Britain was heavily rationing throughout the war, and reserves did get dangerously low at times. But British society proved remarkably resilient. The population accepted harsh rationing and privation. The government implemented emergency measures to conserve resources. Breaking Britain's will might have required not just reduced supplies, but a complete cutoff, which would have been almost impossible to achieve. Britain could probably have survived on minimal imports longer than Germany hoped. Let's consider the Allied response if U-boats had been more successful. Would the Allies have found ways to counter increased submarine effectiveness? History suggests yes. The Allies showed remarkable adaptability throughout the war. When faced with the U-boat threat, they developed convoys, sonar, depth charges, escort carriers, long-range aircraft, centimetric radar, and ultra-intelligence. If U-boats had been even more threatening, the Allies would have invested even more resources in countermeasures. The innovation race might have continued with no guarantee that Germany would stay ahead. There's also the question of morale and crew quality. U-boat crews suffered horrific casualty rates, especially later in the war. By 1944, the average lifespan of a U-boat after leaving port was measured in weeks. Experienced crews were being killed and replaced with hastily trained replacements. Suppose the Battle of the Atlantic had gone on longer with U-boats continuing to suffer heavy losses, even if they were inflicting heavy losses too. Could Germany have maintained crew morale and quality of service? The Allied side also faced challenges, but it had significantly larger pools of trained personnel to draw from. The strategic context matters as well. The Battle of the Atlantic didn't happen in isolation. Germany was fighting on multiple fronts. Resources devoted to the Atlantic campaign were resources not available for the Eastern Front, the Mediterranean, or the air defense of Germany. If Germany had prioritized the Battle of the Atlantic sufficiently to win it, what would they have potentially lost elsewhere? Could they have afforded to produce more U-boats instead of tanks when the Soviet Union was pushing them back? These are strategic trade-offs with no easy answers. Let's talk about what victory would have looked like for Germany in the Atlantic. It wouldn't have been the complete elimination of Allied shipping. That was impossible. Victory would have been reducing Allied shipping capacity below the level needed to sustain Britain economically and militarily. If imports dropped low enough that Britain couldn't feed its population adequately, couldn't maintain war production, couldn't support its military forces overseas, then Britain would be forced to negotiate. This didn't require sinking every ship. It required sinking enough ships that the remainder could no longer carry adequate supplies. The question is whether this was achievable. At the peak of U-boat effectiveness in early 1943, Britain was definitely hurting, but it hadn't yet reached a breaking point. Food reserves were low, but not exhausted. Fuel was tight, but not gone. War production continued. To push Britain over the edge would have required sustaining that level of decline for several more months, while Allied countermeasures were still being developed. Was this possible? Maybe, if several factors had aligned differently. More U-boats, less effective Allied countermeasures, slower American industrial mobilization, better German operational security. These were all possible, but they all needed to happen simultaneously. The human cost of the Battle of the Atlantic was enormous on both sides. Over 30,000 Allied merchant mariners died, along with thousands of Allied naval personnel. German U-boat crews suffered approximately 75% casualties, one of the highest casualty rates of any military force in the war. These were men on both sides doing hazardous jobs in terrible conditions. Merchant mariners on Allied ships knew their ship might be torpedoed at any moment, and that survival in the North Atlantic was unlikely. U-boat crews knew that their boat was a steel coffin if it was detected and attacked. The courage required to keep going into the Atlantic knowing these odds is almost incomprehensible. So could the German U-boat Wolfpacks have won the Battle of the Atlantic? The answer is maybe, but it would have required Germany to do many things differently from the very beginning of the war. They needed to start with more submarines. They needed to prioritize U-boat production over surface ships and other weapons systems. They needed better operational security to protect their communications. They needed to develop advanced submarine technology earlier. They needed to achieve maximum effectiveness before Allied countermeasures and American industrial capacity reached full strength. And they needed all of this to happen before the Allies found counters to their tactics. The reality is that several of these factors were outside Germany's control or would have required prescience that no one had. How could Germany know in 1939 that Ultra would break their codes? How could they predict the exact timing of American industrial mobilization? How could they foresee which technologies would prove decisive? War is fought in conditions of uncertainty, and Germany made strategic choices that seemed reasonable at the time, but, in hindsight, proved not to be optimal for winning the Battle of the Atlantic. The most plausible scenario for German victory in the Atlantic required earlier and heavier investment in U-boats. Suppose Germany had fielded 200 operational submarines by 1941 and maintained aggressive production to replace losses. In that case, they might have created a crisis that Britain couldn't overcome before American help arrived in sufficient quantity. This would have required Hitler to prioritize the Atlantic campaign over other theaters, which might have cost Germany advantages elsewhere. But it was possibly Germany's best path to forcing Britain out of the war. Even if Germany had won the Battle of the Atlantic, it's unclear whether this would have been enough to win the war overall. Forcing Britain to negotiate would have been a major victory, but Germany was still engaged in a battle with the Soviet Union, which had vast resources and territory. America was still in the war and could focus its industrial might on other theaters. Winning the Atlantic might have prevented the D-Day invasion and kept America from building up forces in Britain. Still, it wouldn't have defeated the Soviet Union or prevented America from pursuing a Pacific-first strategy only to return to Europe eventually. The Battle of the Atlantic was ultimately decided by industrial capacity and innovation. The Allies could build ships faster than Germany could sink them and develop countermeasures faster than Germany could adapt. This reflected the advantages the Allies had in terms of resources, industrial capacity, and technological innovation. Germany would have needed to neutralize these advantages completely to win the Atlantic, and that was probably beyond their capabilities, regardless of tactical or strategic decisions. The Wolfpacks were effective and frightening, but they were fighting against odds that were ultimately insurmountable. If this deep dive into one of the war's most crucial campaigns showed you how close Germany came to strangling Britain, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We're exploring the what-ifs, the strategic decisions, and the razor-thin margins that determined the outcome of World War II. Thanks for watching. Remember, wars are won not just by brave men, but by the industrial and technological capacity to support them.